The clip is 9 seconds long, and I am the reason it exists. I held the camera. That is the whole of my crime and the whole of my confession, and if you have watched The Thing, and nearly everyone in Eldermore has watched The Thing, whether they meant to or not, then you have looked through my eyes without knowing it. The framing is mine. The little drift to the left to keep the bearskin in shot. The steadying breath you can almost hear before the fist comes in from the right side of the screen. That breath is mine too. My name is Ivo Wren. I was 24 years old, I was very good at editing, and I thought I was in the business of making people laugh. That morning, the 5th of 9th month, was bright and cold, the kind of light that makes the palace stone look scrubbed. We had been filming since 8. Marek liked to start early, before the city puts its face on, he said, which was the sort of line he said knowing I would cut it into a promo. Marek Tolliver, 2.1 million subscribers. TOLLIVER Unfiltered, the channel that had paid for his flat, his car, his teeth, and the rented van in which the three of us sat eating cold pastries at the edge of Aldergate Square. The third of us was Bexley Crane, who laughed at everything, which is a genuine skill and a genuinely dangerous one. Bex laughed at things before they were funny. She laughed at things instead of thinking about them. She had a laugh like a struck bell, high and clean, and it carried. And Marek had worked out very early in his career that if Bex was laughing, the audience laughed too, because laughter is a thing people catch. We'd already banked 2 bits that morning. The first was the fake proposal outside the transit hall, Marek on one knee to a stranger, roses, the whole show, and the poor woman's face going through 4 weathers in 3 seconds. The second was the collapsing luggage gag on the Kingsway steps. Both were fine. Both were in the private language of the channel, 60,000 view bits. Solid. Forgettable. Marek hated them by 10 o'clock. "They're soft," he said, wiping sugar off his knuckles. "They're what a nice man makes." "They're what a man makes when he doesn't want to be arrested," I said. Bex laughed, of course she did. Marek turned in his seat and looked at me the way he looked at a camera when he wanted something from it. He had a good face. I should say that plainly, because it matters to what happened afterward. He had a face that people trusted for no reason at all, wide-set eyes and a boy's grin, and when he set it on you it was like standing in a warm doorway. "Ivo," he said, "what's the biggest number we've ever done?" "The car park one. 4 million. "And why?" "Because you got shouted at by a man twice your size, and you kept smiling." "Because there was risk asterisk," he said, and he tapped the window glass with one finger twice, the way he did when he was building to something. "Because the audience could smell that it might go wrong. That's the whole thing, Ivo. That's the only thing. Everything else is decoration." Through the window, across the square, past the black railings and the gilded spear tips and the flow of tourists, you could see the north arch of the palace, and under the arch, on a granite plinth worn to a shine by 200 years of boots, a guardsman of the king's own. He was too far away for us to see his face. He was a red shape and a black shape, a tunic and a bearskin, white gloves, a rifle held at his side like it had grown there. Around him the square did what the square always did. Children ran and were called back, tour guides raised their little flags, 100 phones went up and made their small bright rectangles of him. "Him," Marek said. Bex stopped laughing. "That should have told me something." "No," I said. "You don't even know what I'm going to say." "I know exactly what you're going to say because you've been saying it since the summer, and every time you say it I say no, and then you say I'm a coward, and then we go and film something else." "They can't move," Marek said, ignoring me completely, leaning forward between the seats now with that warm doorway face on. "That's the whole joke. That's the whole asterisk gift. There is a man standing in the middle of the Capitol who is not allowed to react to anything. He's not a person, Ivo, he's a asterisk set up asterisk. He's a punchline with a hat on. He's a soldier." "He's a asterisk statue asterisk," Marek said. "He's a statue they pay to be a statue." "I want to be honest about the next part," because there has been a great deal said about me and most of it is kinder than I deserve. I did not walk away. I did not take the camera out of the bag and put it back into the bag and get out of the van. I sat there with the bag on my knees and I felt the thing I always felt when Marek got like this, which was not fear and was not conscience. It was appetite. Because he was right about one thing, it would be enormous. How far? I said. And Marek smiled, because he had already won and we both knew it. And he said the sentence that 4 months later a Crown advocate would read out in a courtroom of the Crown Court of Eldermore in a flat voice, with a pause after every clause, while 100 people looked at the floor. As far as it takes to get a reaction. Here is what I knew about the King's own household regiment on the 5th of 9th month. I knew they wore red. I knew the hats were real fur and that people got upset about that. I knew they weren't allowed to talk to you, and that there were compilations, hundreds of them, whole channels of them, of people trying to make them talk, and that this was considered a wholesome kind of content, the kind of thing you sent to your mother. That was it. That was everything. Here is what I did not know. I did not know that the man under the arch was Guardsman Halden Rook, 31 years old, of the 3rd Company, and that he had been on that plinth for 52 minutes when we started walking toward him, with 68 minutes to go before the change. I did not know that his father, Corbin Rook, had stood on the same plinth for 11 years, and now sat in a chair by a window in a care home at Fenner's Cross, and could not always remember his son's name, but could still, if you put a cap in his hands, tell you the correct number of paces from the North Arch to the Queen's Steps. I did not know that Halden Rook had a wife called Nessa who worked nights at a laundry and slept in the afternoons, and that the two of them were saving for a flat with a garden, and that Rook had done 406 days on public post without a single fault recorded against him. I did not know that a guardsman's rifle is not a prop. I did not know that the reason he could not react was not that he was forbidden a reaction the way a schoolboy is forbidden to speak in class. It was that reacting was the failure. It was the one way to lose. Everything they had put into him for 3 years was aimed at exactly that, at making a man who could be tested and would not give the test what it came for. I did not know any of that. But I want to be very clear, because Marek's lawyer would later work extremely hard to make my not knowing sound like the same thing as innocence. I knew we were going to hurt him. I just thought hurt was a small word. We walked across the square at 11:15. I had the main camera on the gimbal low, held at hip height, so it read as casual. That was the house style, the shaky handheld truth of it, because a steady shot looks staged and a staged shot doesn't travel. Bex had her phone up for the vertical cut. Marek had nothing in his hands at all, which was deliberate. Marek's hands were the product. And in my coat pocket, clipped to the strap, running the whole time because I had turned it on in the van and never turned it off, was the little B camera. A stub of black plastic the size of a lighter. It had a wide lens and terrible color, and it recorded everything it saw and everything it heard, and it had been rolling since Marek said him. I had forgotten it was there. I want that on the record because it is the only lucky thing that ever happened to me. I had forgotten it was there. The forecourt was busy. 9th month is the last warm month and the tour groups were thick along the railings, and there was a queue at the gate for the state rooms, and a man was selling roasted nuts from a cart that smelled better than it tasted. Under the North Arch, on his plinth, Guardsman Rook stood with his eyes forward and his rifle at his side, and the sun coming across him at an angle that put half his face in shadow under the bearskin's peak. Marek started small, the way he always did, because Marek understood escalation better than anyone I have ever met. He understood that you have to bring an audience up a staircase. If you kick the door down, they leave. If you take them up one step at a time, they will follow you into a burning house. Step 1, he stood beside Rook and pulled a face. The crowd laughed. It is a small, easy, forgivable laugh, the kind that costs nothing, and half the people filming it had done the same thing themselves an hour before. Step 2, he mimicked him. Chin up, chest out, an exaggerated march on the spot, the whole soft parody. That got a bigger laugh, and Bex's bell rang out over the top of it, and I saw 2 or 3 people in the crowd lift their phones higher because they'd recognized him now. That's Tolliver, that's Marek Tolliver. Step 3, he talked to him. Leaned in close under the fur, close enough that his breath must have been on the man's cheek, and said things I will not repeat, not because they were obscene, but because they were so stupid, the small, graceless jabs of a man reaching for a nerve. He called him a toy. He asked if he was breathing. He asked whether he'd been switched on that morning. He said loudly to the crowd, "I don't think there's anyone in there." And Halden Rook stood. Not stiffly. That's what nobody understands until they've stood close to one of them. He wasn't rigid, he wasn't straining. He was at rest. He was the most relaxed man in that square. The rest of us were vibrating, Marek off his own noise, Bex off her laugh, me off the shot. And in the middle of us was a man breathing slowly with his eyes on the middle distance, costing us nothing. That was the problem. I saw it happen in real time, and I did not understand what I was seeing. The laugh was going flat. You can hear it on the footage if you know what to listen for. The crowd laughs at step 1, laughs harder at step 2, and then at step 3 there's a wobble in it, a thinning. A few people going quiet, someone saying "oh, come on," because Marek was pushing on a door that would not open, and a joke that gets no answer starts, very quickly, to look like something else. It starts to look like a man shouting at a wall. Marek felt it, he always felt it. He turned his head a fraction toward me, and I saw his eyes come up out of the character, quick and cold, the way a swimmer's eyes come up out of water. He was losing the room. And this is the part I have said out loud in a courtroom, and I will say it here in my own words, where nobody is asking me questions. I did not lower the camera. I did not step in. I kept the frame steady, and I widened it just slightly, just enough to have room on the right-hand side of the shot. I made space for it. I made space for his fist. He hit him with his right hand. It was not a haymaker. That's the other thing people get wrong when they describe it, because they have watched it 40 times and their memory has made it bigger. It was a short, snapping, thrown-away punch, the kind of thing a man does with his shoulder more than his arm, and it landed on the left side of Halden Rook's jaw, right where the chin strap of the bearskin ran under the bone. The sound is on the recording. It is not a dramatic sound. It is a small, dull, unmusical noise like a book dropped on a carpet. And Marek Tolliver laughed. That is the frame they used on every front page in the realm, not the punch. The frame is 1/10 of a second after the punch, and in it Marek's arm is still out and his head is back and his mouth is open in a laugh, wide and delighted and lit up like a boy on a fairground ride, and behind his shoulder, half in the shadow of the arch, you can see Halden Rook's face. His head had moved. It had to. A jaw is a jaw. It had turned perhaps the width of 2 fingers with the force of it, and then it had come back. His eyes had not changed. He was looking exactly where he had been looking before, at a point above the crowd, and there was nothing in his face at all, not anger, not shock, not pain, though we know now that he was in a great deal of pain, nothing but a man continuing to do the thing he had been doing. And that is when the laughter died. I have thought about the mechanics of it more than any sane man should. I have taken those 9 seconds apart frame by frame at 3 in the morning, and what I can tell you is that it did not die the way you would expect. It did not stop like a switch. It came apart in layers. The nearest people went first, the ones close enough to have heard the sound. They stopped between one breath and the next. Then the second rank, who hadn't heard it but saw the faces of the first rank, and a laugh cannot survive in a ring of appalled faces. And then, last of all, from somewhere out at the back where people had seen only that a famous man had done something and everyone was excited, There came 2 or 3 lonely little peals of laughter that went up into all that silence like sparks off a dead fire, and heard themselves and stopped. Bex's bell rang once, and then it cut off in the middle, and I looked at her, and she had both hands over her mouth, and above them her eyes were enormous. 6 seconds, that's what the timestamps say. 6 seconds from the punch to the moment when the only sound left in the forecourt of the palace was a pigeon and the man with the nut cart, who hadn't looked up. And Marek was still laughing. That's what damns him, not the punch. The court could have been made to understand the punch, a young man, a stupid stunt, a rush of blood. What could not be explained away, not by the finest advocate in Eldermore, was that he went on laughing for 4.5 seconds into total silence, looking around at all those stricken faces with genuine, dazzling confusion, waiting for them to catch up with the joke. He turned to me, straight down the barrel of my lens, arms out, palms open, the grin still on him. "Nothing," he said to the camera, to 2.1 million people, to the whole future. He can't do anything. We were in the van in 90 seconds. Nobody stopped us. That is the detail that made half the realm furious afterward, and it is the detail that made me understand, eventually, what kind of institution we had walked into. Nobody rugby-tackled Marek Tolliver. Nobody wrestled him to the cobbles. 2 constables of the household police came out from the gate lodge at a fast walk, not a run, a walk, and by then we were already moving through the crowd, and the crowd, which was still deciding what it had just seen, parted for us the way crowds do. I looked back once, from the corner of the square. Halden Rook was still on his plinth. Nobody had gone to him. Nobody had helped him down, because there was nothing to help him down from. He had not fallen, he had not staggered, he had not so much as shifted his boots on the granite. 200 people were standing in a ragged half-circle staring at him with their phones down at their sides, and he stood in the middle of all that attention with his eyes forward and his rifle at his side. And I remember thinking, with a lurch that I did not have a name for yet, "He's still working." He had 61 minutes left on that post. He stood every one of them. I did not learn what those 61 minutes cost until I was sitting in a courtroom with my hands between my knees, listening to a doctor read from a document. Marek's fist had driven the buckle of the chin strap up under the cheekbone. The strap is a good strap. It is designed to hold a 2-kilo bearskin steady on a marching man's head, and it does not give. There was a hairline fracture of the left zygomatic arch, a crack, not a break, the kind of injury that does not show and does not bleed and does not stop a determined man from doing anything at all except think about anything else. He stood for 61 more minutes. He completed the sentry drill at the half hour, which involves a turn, 12 paces, a turn, 12 paces back. There is footage of it. The palace has cameras, not the one that everyone would argue about later, but others on the inner court. And on that grainy overhead, you can watch a small red figure at the top of the frame execute a set of movements at exactly the tempo he had executed them at 406 times before. He was relieved at 12:26. He marched off with his section. He reported to the guardroom, and to Sergeant Major Caddock Blaine he said, "This is in the incident log, in Blaine's own handwriting, and it was read out in court, and it is the reason a number of people in the public gallery cried. Sir, I was struck on post at 11:24. I did not consider it a threat to the post. I did not leave the post. Request permission to see the medical officer." Blaine, who was 58 and had a face like a closed door, said afterward that he had been in the regiment for 31 years and had never once had to sit down before answering a man. I cut the video that night. I want to be precise about this, because there is a version of me that people have been generous enough to imagine, a young man in torment, editing with tears on his face, and he did not exist. He came later. The man at the desk that night was a professional doing the best work of his life. I remember the choices. I remember them the way a man remembers a road he shouldn't have taken. I cut the third step, the leaning in, the there's nobody in there, because it played mean without the payoff. I cut most of the aftermath because the silence was a downer and silence does not travel. I kept the punch, obviously. I kept Merck's laugh. And then, at the end, I did the thing that a Crown advocate would later describe as the single most cynical act of craftsmanship this court has been shown, and which at the time I considered rather clever. I added laughter. Not fake laughter. I would never have used a canned track. I had standards, which is the funniest sentence I will ever write. I went into the audio from the asterisk earlier part of the bit, from step 1, the pulled face, the harmless bit, and I lifted 40 seconds of the crowd genuinely laughing, and I laid it under the punch and under the aftermath, writing it down slowly so it faded out over Merck's line. So that when you watched it, the world laughed with him. So that the silence never happened. I published it at 8:12 in the evening under the title I Punched a Royal Guard. He didn't even move. And I went to bed. And by morning it had 4 million views. And by the end of the week it had 31 million. And there is not a person in this realm who has not, in some form, seen my 9 seconds. I made the silence disappear. Everything that happened to Marek Tolliver afterward, everything that happened to all of us, happened because other people spent 4 months putting the silence back. The first knock came 40 hours later. Marek had been expecting it. That is the thing nobody believes. He had scheduled it. He'd told his manager, Sable Ordway, to keep the morning clear, and he'd asked me casually over breakfast with his mouth full whether the hall camera had a wide enough lens. "They're coming today," he said. "Maybe tomorrow. Get it from the kitchen so you've got the door in shot." "Marek." "What?" "They're going to arrest you." "Ivo?" He set his cup down. He had that warm doorway face on, and behind it was the thing I had spent 3 years not looking at directly, which was that he was not frightened of anything because nothing had ever cost him anything. That's the asterisk content asterisk. So when Inspector Nell Farrow of the Household Police stood in the doorway of a flat on Cardigan Row at 9:30 in the morning and told Marek Tolliver that he was under arrest on suspicion of assault upon a sworn guardsman on ceremonial duty and of criminal trespass within a royal precinct, and cautioned him, there was a camera running on a shelf behind a fruit bowl. Farrow noticed it. She was about 45, small and gray and utterly unhurried, and she looked at the fruit bowl for about a second and a half, and then went on with the caution as if it wasn't there. Marek held out both wrists, grinning. "Do the cuffs," he said. "Come on, do the cuffs, it's better." "You'll want your coat," said Inspector Farrow. "It's cold out." He was interviewed for 5 hours and released on bail the same evening, and I edited that footage too. Arrested for a joke. Went up 90 minutes after he got home. 11 million views in 2 days. In it he is funny and rueful and just slightly wounded, and there is a bit where he does an impression of the custody sergeant that is, I have to say, extremely good, and there is a bit at the end where he sits on the edge of his bed with the light behind him and says, quietly, to the lens, "Look, if we've got to the point in this country where a man can go to prison for tapping a soldier who is paid to stand there and be looked at, then I'd rather go to prison. I would. I'd rather go to prison than live in a place where you're not allowed to laugh." I have watched that clip perhaps 100 times since, and I still cannot decide whether he believed a single word of it. I don't think he could have told you either. Marek didn't have beliefs. He had positions, the way a man in a boat has positions, and he moved to whichever one kept him above the water. The comments were 4-1 in his favor that week. There were essays about it. There was a phrase going around the humorless kingdom, and a great many people who had never thought about the King's Own for 1 minute of their lives were suddenly very certain that the guards were an anachronism, a costume, a tourist attraction that had got above itself. And there was a hashtag, and the hashtag was the beginning of everything that came after. And I saw it trending on the Tuesday, and I felt a small, cold hand close on the back of my neck. The palace said nothing. That was Sable Ordway's read, and Sable was nobody's fool. She sat in Merrick's kitchen on the Wednesday with her coat still on and her tea going cold, and she said, "They've made a mistake. They're doing the dignified silence. The dignified silence only works if you're the only one talking, and darling, you are not the only one talking. You're being outshouted by a boy with a fist." "So what do we do?" said Merrick. "Nothing," she said. "You do absolutely nothing, you say absolutely nothing, you take the trial, you're contrite, you get a fine and 100 hours of picking up litter, and you come out of it the most famous man in Eldermore, but—" She held up one finger. "Nothing new, nothing until the trial, no more videos about the guards, not one." Merrick looked at her for a long moment. "Sable," he said, "I've got a piece going up Friday." I remember her face. I remember it going through something very like the four weathers we'd filmed on that woman's face outside the transit hall. "What piece?" "The piece was called Asterisk. I went back asterisk." He had gone back to Aldergate Square, not into the forecourt. He wasn't stupid. His bail conditions barred him from the precinct, but to the pavement across the road with a long lens, and he had filmed the North Arch and the Guardsman on it, whoever it was that day, for 11 minutes. And he had talked over it. He had talked about how they wanted him locked up for a slap. He had talked about how the man in the hat was fine, obviously fine. Look at him, standing there, right as rain. And then, at the end, he had done the thing that I think, if I had to name the single moment when Marek Tolliver was lost, I think was the moment. He'd raised his hand, across the road, across the traffic, out of reach, and he had thrown a slow punch at the air in the direction of the palace. And he'd laughed. Sable Ordway resigned by letter that night. It was 3 lines long. I have seen it. The 3rd line said, "You have mistaken an institution for an audience, and you will find that it does not applaud." I should tell you what was happening to Halden Rook in those weeks, because I didn't know, and I have since spent a great deal of time and a great deal of humility finding out. He was not, as Merrick kept saying, fine. He was not seriously hurt either, and he would be the first man in the realm to say so, and did say so flatly in court when the defense tried to make a meal of it. A cracked cheekbone heals. He was back on light duties in 11 days and back on public post in 5 weeks, and he never took a day of leave he was entitled to, and never once claimed to be a victim of anything. What was happening to him was worse than an injury and much harder to see. Halden Rook was under review. There is a thing in that regiment, in any regiment I've learned, but in that one especially, called the standing of the post. The post is not a man. The post is the arch and the plinth and the 200 years and the whole idea, and a man is only ever lent to it for 2 hours at a time. And a question had come up the chain, from someone in an office who had watched the 9 seconds like everybody else, and the question was this: if a guardsman on public duty can be struck in front of 200 witnesses and 31 million viewers, and nothing whatsoever happens, has the post been diminished? And if it has, who diminished it, the man who struck or the man who stood? There were serious people who thought Rook should have moved, that he should have brought the rifle across at least, that he should have taken a pace and called the guard out, that a doctrine which produced a man standing quietly with a fractured face while the whole world laughed was a doctrine that had gone soft in the middle and was now, demonstrably, an invitation. Sergeant Major Caddock Blaine went up to the palace and sat in a room with 3 officers and argued for 2 hours, and I have been told by a man who was there that he said this: if he'd moved, we'd have a video of a guardsman brawling at the arch, and it would be on the same channel, and it would have twice the views, and the joke would have asterisk worked asterisk. He gave that boy nothing. He gave him the worst thing he had. And you are sitting here asking me to punish him for it because you don't like how the silence looked. They did not punish him, But they did not close the review either. They left it open, the way you leave a door on the latch, and it hung over Halden Rook all through the autumn, a quiet possibility that at the end of all this, the man who did everything right might be the only person who lost his post. He never spoke about it. Nessa Rook told me later, in a kitchen I had no right to be sitting in, that in those weeks he came home and ate his supper and did not talk, and that once, folding his shirts, she found him standing at the window doing nothing at all, and when she asked him what was wrong, he said, "They're going to make it my fault for not hitting him back." And then he went to bed and got up at 4 and went to work. The first copycat was a 19-year-old in the eastern provinces who did not touch anybody. He walked up to a sentry outside a provincial barracks, faked a punch, pulled it a foot short, and ran away shrieking with delight while his friend filmed. It got 200,000 views. It was, if you can hold two thoughts at once, genuinely harmless and completely poisonous, because 200,000 views is a number you can chase. The second copycat flicked a guardsman's ear. The third threw a paper cup of iced coffee. By the third week of 9th month there were, by the count later given in evidence, 141 separate uploads across the realm's platforms carrying the tag Merck's audience had invented for him, and the arc of them was the arc of everything Merck had ever taught me about escalation. You have to take them up a staircase. Nobody watches a man flick an ear twice. So it went. An ear, a shove, a snatched glove. Then a boy in Caro who got his hands on a guardsman's rifle sling and hung off it, laughing, while the guardsman, 20 years old, 4 months in the regiment, stood there with his knuckles white and his jaw set, and did not move, because that is the doctrine, and the doctrine had just become the most tested proposition in Eldermore. Then a woman spat. And the thing about the staircase is that Merck never had to climb it. That was the discovery that sat in my stomach like a swallowed stone all through those weeks, and that I could not say out loud, because saying it out loud would have meant saying it about myself. Merck had done one thing once. But he had built a asterisk shape, a 9-second, 31 million view shape, and the shape said, "Here is a man who cannot answer you, and here is the sound of everyone laughing." And the laughter in that shape was laughter I had put there with my own hands. On the 9th of 10th month, 3 young men went down to the North Arch at noon, on a Saturday, with a plan. They were not, I think, wicked. I have read everything about them that there is to read, and what I have concluded is that they were bored and they were 20, and they had watched a great many videos. Their plan was to do all of it at once, the ear, the shove, the hat, a compilation in a single take, because that was the escalation the audience now required, and one of them had a phone on a selfie stick and a live stream running. The forecourt was full. 9th and 10th month Saturdays always are, and it was a bright day, and there was a queue for the state rooms 4 deep along the railings. Standing in that queue about 2/3 of the way along was a man called Ellis Hone. He was 76. He had a walking stick and a regimental tie, and he had been in the King's Own himself for 9 years, a very long time ago, and he had brought his sister's grandson to see the change of guard. The young man was 22 and had just enlisted, and Ellis Hone had wanted him to see the arch. I know what he was wearing. I know what he had in his pockets. I know that he had bought a bag of roasted nuts from the cart, and that he did not like them. I know these things because I sat in the public gallery and listened to him tell a courtroom, in a dry, careful, unhurried voice, exactly what had happened to him. The 3 young men went at the guardsman. The guardsman held. The crowd, and this is the part that mattered, this is the part that changed everything about how the realm thought about my 9 seconds. The crowd moved. Not to help. Not all of them. Some of them surged forward to see, and some of them surged forward with their phones up, and some of them surged forward because 100 people surging forward makes 100 more, and the queue at the railings went from a line into a crush, and Ellis Hone, who was 76 and had a stick, went over sideways against the iron. He broke his wrist and cracked 2 ribs and lay on the cobbles under the feet of a crowd that was filming something else. The live stream from the selfie stick ran for another minute and 40 seconds. In it you can hear, from off-frame, a young man's voice saying someone's down. There's someone down, and you can hear laughter over the top of it, because the 3 young men had got what they came for and were running, and the crowd around the arch was still laughing, and the laughter had not yet worked out what it had done. That's the thing about a laugh in a crowd. It's the last thing to find out. The guardsman on post that day was not Halden Rook. It was a lance corporal called Petrie, and he broke. I don't mean he lashed out. I mean he broke the post, which is a different thing, and in that regiment an enormous thing. He came off the plinth. He shouldered through a crush of 200 people, and he got down on the cobbles in a red tunic and a bearskin in the middle of a live stream, and he put his gloved hands on an old man's shoulder and held his head still and told him to lie where he was and not to move, and he shouted for the gate lodge in a voice that carried across the whole forecourt, and he stayed there on his knees on the stones until the medics came. He was disciplined for it, formally, a note on his record for abandoning the post. And then, 3 days later, that note was expunged by an order that came down from an office nobody in the 3rd Company had ever received an order from before, and the order was signed by Princess Adela. She was Colonel-in-Chief of the King's Own. She had held the appointment for 22 years. She had, according to Blaine, never in that time interfered with a single disciplinary matter, on the grounds that a regiment that needs a princess to run it is not a regiment. The order was 1 sentence long. The post was not abandoned. It was carried into the crowd. I did not know it then, but that sentence was the first time the realm's silence broke, and it broke on our side of the line, not on Merck's. The forecourt was closed to the public on the 14th of 10th month. They did it quietly, and they did it temporarily, pending a review of public safety at the ceremonial precincts, and the effect of it was that the barriers went up 30 meters back from the north arch, and the guardsman on the plinth became a small red shape you could photograph but not reach. You would have to have grown up in Harrogate to understand what that did to the city. The forecourt is not a monument. It's a asterisk place asterisk. It is where the city takes its ants when they visit. It is where the schools go. It is where a man proposes when he can't afford anywhere better, and where the flower sellers set up on the Kingsway side, and where 3 generations of a family will stand shoulder to shoulder at 11 in the morning to watch 100 men in red do something extremely difficult extremely well, for no reason except that it is theirs. And now there were barriers and a sign and 2 constables, and the nut cart had moved to the transit hall. The city was furious, and the fury did not go where Marek expected it to go. I watched him work it out. That's the memory of him I keep, more than the punch Marek Tolliver at his kitchen table at 1 in the morning with the tablet in his hands, scrolling, and his face doing something I had never seen it do in 3 years. Because the comments had turned. Not slowly, all at once the way a crowd turns. The same accounts that had made the humorless kingdom into a slogan were now posting photographs of a barrier where their grandmother used to stand, and a photograph of an old man's stick lying on the cobbles, and the arithmetic underneath was very simple and very brutal, and it went, "This is because of you." They loved it, he said. He said it about 4 times that night. Ivo, they loved asterisk it, 31 million. They were asterisk with asterisk me. I know. So what changed? And I said, and I am not proud of this, and I am not ashamed of it either. It's just what I said. Nothing changed, Marek. They just found out what it cost. The Crown Advocate's office added 2 charges in the last week of 10th month. The first was straightforward. The assault charge was elevated from simple to aggravated, on the grounds that the victim was a sworn officer of the Crown on ceremonial duty and unable, by his oath and his standing orders, to defend himself. There is a specific statute. It is very old. It was written for men who threw stones at sentries in a century when that was a common thing, and it had not been used in Eldermore for 61 years, and it carried up to 4 years. The second charge was the one that made everybody sit up. Profiting from an unlawful act. The Crown was moving to seize every crown of revenue that I punched a royal guard and its 2 sequels had earned, and to argue, in open court, that Marek Tolliver had not merely committed an assault but had *manufactured and marketed *1, that the video was not a record of the crime but the *purpose of it, that a man who commits an offense in order to sell the footage of the offense is not a prankster who went too far but something for which the law already has a perfectly good word. Marek's new advocate was a man called Perrin Doyle, who was said to be the best in the realm and who dressed like an undertaker's more successful brother, and Doyle told him, in front of me, in a conference room with a view of the river, "They're not trying you for hitting a soldier, Mr. Tolliver. Anyone can be forgiven for hitting a soldier. The realm is full of drunks. They're trying you for selling it, and if they make that stick, you will not be a young man who made a mistake. You will be a business model that a court has declared illegal, and every sponsor you have ever had will be gone by supper." Marek laughed. He actually laughed. And I looked at Perrin Doyle's face and saw that Doyle, who had defended men accused of far worse things than this, was for a moment genuinely at a loss. And I understood, with a clarity I had been avoiding for 2 months, that my friend had a hole in him where the part that feels consequences was supposed to be, and that no amount of evidence was ever going to fill it. "Then we'd better win," Marek said. "Yes," said Doyle very dryly, "we had better. And here is the thing I have to tell you, the thing that turned the whole autumn on its head, and that I did not learn until the 2nd week of the trial. They were going to win. The case against Marek Tolliver had a hole in it the size of an arch, and Perrin Doyle found it in about a fortnight. It started with the palace cameras. There are cameras all along that frontage, of course there are, and one of them looks directly down onto the plinth at the north arch. It had been offline for 11 days for a scheduled replacement of the housing. It came back on the following Tuesday. On the 5th of 9th month it was a dead eye in a bracket. The inner court camera caught Rook doing his drill afterward at a range of 90 meters from behind, which proved nothing about a punch. The gate lodge camera caught the crowd's backs. That was it. The Crown had no institutional footage of the offense at all. What the Crown had was my footage. And here is where Perrin Doyle went to work with the cold pleasure of a man opening a familiar lock. The original master file, the untouched capture off the main camera, 41 minutes of it had been deleted. Not by Marek, by me. It went in a routine purge on the 14th, the way every master went, because the channel shot 200 hours a month and storage costs money, and I had never once in 3 years kept a master longer than 9 days. I had a policy. I could produce the policy. The policy had been written by me in a document called House, RULES, that also contained our procedure for buying pastries. So the only version of the assault that existed in the world was the one I had cut, and the one I had cut had a laugh track on it. Doyle put that in front of the court in the first week of the trial, like a man laying down a winning hand very gently. "Mr. Wren, is it your evidence that you took the audio of a crowd laughing at one moment and placed it underneath the audio of a wholly different moment?" "Yes." "So the sound the realm has heard 31 million times, the sound of a nation apparently laughing at a soldier being struck, is a sound you fabricated?" "Yes." "The impact, the noise of the impact, is that authentic?" And I had to say, I don't know. I didn't. That's the horror of it. I had layered and compressed and leveled and sweetened that audio at 11 o'clock at night in a room with the curtains shut, the way I had done to 400 videos before it, and I could not put my hand on my heart and swear to a court of law which sounds in that mix had happened in the world, and which ones I had built. I had spent 3 years making things sound better than they were. It had never once occurred to me that one day a man's liberty would depend on the difference. Doyle turned to the bench and said, in a voice of exquisite reasonableness, "My lord, the Crown's only evidence of this alleged assault is a piece of entertainment, edited for effect by a self-confessed manipulator of images, from which the original has been destroyed. We are not looking at a photograph of a crime. We are looking at an asterisk cartoon of one." And the arithmetic underneath, which he was far too good to say aloud, went like this: 200 eyewitnesses, and eyewitnesses are the worst evidence there is. 9 of them said the right hand, 4 said the left. 6 said a closed fist, 3 said an open palm. 1, a very honest woman of 60, said she had only realized what she had seen when she watched the video that night, which is precisely the sentence a defense advocate prays for, because it means her memory had been laundered through my edit. The cheekbone, a hairline fracture discovered at 13:40 on the 5th in a man who had spent the previous 3 hours in a crowd in a heavy bearskin with a steel-buckled strap, and who had been in a physical trade for 9 years. Doyle did not need to prove another cause. He only needed to say the word another. And so, on the 11th of 11th month, the Crown Advocate's office received an offer. I was not in the room. Blaine told me about it 2 years later, in the way that men of his kind tell you things, which is to say sideways, over a cup of tea he had made too strong, while looking out of a window. The offer was this: Marek Tolliver would plead guilty to a public order offense, a nothing charge, a Drunkenness Square charge. He would issue a public apology in a form of words agreed with the palace. He would donate the entire revenue of the videos, all of it, every crown, to the Regimental Benevolent Fund, without any admission that the revenue was unlawful. And in exchange, the Crown would drop the aggravated assault and the profiting charge, and there would be no trial. And the palace wanted to take it. Not out of cowardice. I want to be fair, and it took me a long time to be fair about this. They wanted to take it because a trial is stage asterisk. Because 6 weeks of Marek Tolliver in the dock, funny and rueful and photogenic, with a gallery full of his people outside, was 6 weeks of the thing that had made him in the first place. Because the King's Own does not exist to be a plaintiff. Because there was a real and serious argument made by serious men who loved the regiment, that the fastest way to end a joke is to stop being its audience, and that a courtroom would be the biggest audience he had ever had. And because, if they lost, and Doyle had shown them exactly how they might lose, then the last word in the matter of the man who punched a royal guard would be not guilty asterisk, and that word would be on the arch forever. They put it to Halden Rook. They didn't have to. But Blaine insisted, and Princess Adela, who by then had asked to be told everything, and was told everything, said that the man who had stood the 61 minutes would be asked before anything was signed. Rook was on the inner court coming off a duty, still with the sweat in his hair from the bearskin. Blaine walked him across to a corner of the colonnade and told him the offer, the money, the apology, the end of it. He told him about the camera that had been offline. He told him what Doyle would do to me in the box, and what that would do to the case, and he told him, because Blaine did not lie to his men, ever, about anything, that the open review of his own conduct would very likely close quietly and favorably if the matter went away. He said, "It ends today. And you keep everything." And Halden Rook stood in a colonnade in his shirt sleeves and looked at the stones for a while. Then he said, "Will he say it happened? He'll apologize for the distress caused." "That's not what I asked, sir." "No," said Blaine, "he won't." And Rook said, and Blaine's voice, when he told me this, did something I would not have believed a voice like that could do. "Then he'll do it again. Not to me. He won't need to do it to me. He'll do it to whoever's on the plinth on a Saturday, and he'll do it with a lawyer's letter in his pocket saying nobody ever proved the last one. He straightened his cuffs. Sir, I'm not the one being asked. The Post is, and the Post can't take a settlement. It's not the Post's to take. They ran out of time on the 20th of 11th month. That was the deadline Doyle had set for the Crown to accept the plea, and at 4 o'clock that afternoon the Crown advocate, a hard, tired man called Owen Pell, had a decision to make and no evidence to make it with. And at 4:20, I was standing in my mother's hallway in Fenner's Cross, holding a coat. I had not worn that coat since the 5th of 9th month. It had gone into the back of a cupboard at my mother's house the week the death threats started, along with everything else I owned that could be recognized in a photograph. It was a gray coat with a torn lining, and I was taking it because it was cold and it was there. And when I picked it up, something knocked against the wall. A stub of black plastic the size of a lighter, clipped to the strap. I stood in that hallway for a very long time, long enough for my mother to call from the kitchen and ask if I was all right, and for me to say yes, and for that to be the last lie I told anybody about any of it. I knew what was on it. I knew before I ever put it into a reader. I had turned it on in the van at 11 o'clock in the morning on the 5th of 9th month, and I had never turned it off, and it had a wide lens and terrible color and a microphone that was, I remember thinking at the time with professional contempt, far too honest. It had been in my pocket when Marek said he's a punchline with a hat on. It had been in my pocket when he said as far as it takes to get a reaction. It had been on my hip, 6 feet from the plinth at 11:24. And it had been in the van afterward. I watched the whole file once, in my childhood bedroom at 2 in the morning with headphones on and the lights off. The angle is low and awful and half of it is my own coat. The color is bad. The lens curves the world at the edges. It is the worst piece of footage I have ever handled in my life, and it is the only honest thing I have ever made, and I did not make it, I just failed to turn it off. The van conversation is all there, every word in sequence with the pastry bag rustling. The walk across the square is there. And then the arch, from 6 feet away from below, from an angle where the bearskin does not hide anything, and the fist comes across, and the sound. The sound is not the sound I used. The sound I used had been sweetened and compressed and made asterisk good asterisk. The real one is small and dull, and it has a click in it and it turns your stomach, and the microphone was too honest for it, and there is no laugh track under it because there is no laughter under it, because for 6 seconds afterward there is nothing in that recording but the wind and a pigeon and faintly a nut cart. And Marek laughing into it. And then the van. All 4 doors slamming and Bex crying, actually crying, hard with her fist in her mouth, and saying he didn't even move, Marek. He didn't even move, and Marek, up front, breathing fast, high on it, radiant, saying the 31 words that I have not been able to unhear in the 2 years since. Ivo, listen to me. Cut the last bit, all of it. Cut the silence, take it right out, nobody watches a joke that dies. Put the laugh back on. Put the laugh back on, and it's the biggest thing we've ever done. And my own voice from behind the camera, from 6 inches away from the microphone, flat and calm and entirely without hesitation, saying, "Yes, I know." I sat with it until the sky went gray. I want to tell you that it was a hard decision, and it was, but not for the reason you would think. It was not hard because of loyalty. I had stopped being loyal to Marek Tolliver at some point in 10th month, quietly, without telling him or myself. It was hard because of what was on the front of the file. Because the pre-roll and the punch would end him, yes. But the van and the cut the silence and my own voice saying, "Yeah, I know," that ended asterisk me asterisk. That was not a witness's recording. That was a confession. Handing that to Inspector Nell Farrow meant handing her the proof that the man who edited the video had been told, by the man who threw the punch, to remove the evidence of the crime's effect, and to manufacture a public reaction that had not occurred. And there is a phrase for that too, and it is not asterisk editing. I could have wiped it. It would have taken 11 seconds. Nobody knew it existed. Nobody in the world knew it existed. At 6 in the morning, I put the coat on and walked 4 miles into Harrogate in the cold, past the transit hall, past the Kingsway steps where we had done the luggage gag, up to the barriers 30 meters from the North Arch, where a guardsman I did not know stood on a plinth in the dark with a rifle at his side, doing his job in an empty square. I stood at the barrier for a while and watched him. Then I went and found a police station, and I put the little black stub of plastic on the counter, and I said, "My name is Ivo Wren. I filmed it. There's another camera. You need to hear what he told me to do." Inspector Nell Farrow did not thank me. She sat me in a room with a duty advocate and a cup of tea, and she said, in that unhurried gray voice, "Mr. Wren, before you say another word, do you understand that you are about to give me evidence against yourself, and that I will use it?" "Yes." "Do you understand that the man in that recording telling you to remove the silence is not the only person on it who is going to be charged?" "Yes." She looked at me for a long moment. "Good," she said. "Then let's begin, and let's do it properly, because there is a guardsman standing on a plinth in the rain who has waited 3 months for one honest person to walk through a door." The Crown withdrew from the plea negotiation the following morning. Perrin Doyle received a single sheet of paper, and according to a clerk who watched him read it, said nothing at all for about 15 seconds, and then said one word, which the clerk declined to repeat. The trial of Marek Tolliver opened at the Crown Court of Eldermore on the 4th of 12th month, before Mr. Justice Auberon Hale. They played it on the 3rd day. It is a strange thing to sit in a public gallery and watch a courtroom of grown adults be shown, on a screen the size of a door, the inside of your own coat pocket. It ran for 11 minutes and 40 seconds. The van, the walk, the arch, the punch, the silence, the flight, and the 31 words. The court had it 4 times, once whole, then in 3 sections, with the audio engineer of the household police in the box explaining, in language of magnificent dullness, why this file could not have been altered, and how the timecode and the censor noise and the microphone's own hiss made it a thing that could be tested and had been. Nobody moved. There is a particular quality that a room acquires when a great many people are all refusing, at the same moment, to look at the same man, and the dock is the only place they will not look. When the van section played, Marek's voice, breathless and shining, cut the silence, take it right out. Nobody watches a joke that dies. I watched Perrin Doyle put down his pen. He did not pick it up again for a long time. He was much too good an advocate to look at his client. But he stopped writing, and that was the moment I understood with a strange, hollow, unhappy certainty that it was over. Because everything Doyle had built was built on one word, and the word was impulse asterisk. A young man, a stupid morning, a rush of blood, a mistake anyone might make and no one would plan. And the recording did not merely damage that word, it ate it. You could hear Marek Tolliver deciding, in a van, an hour beforehand, that a man in a red tunic was not a person, but a mechanism for making a number go up. And you could hear him, 40 minutes afterward, ordering the surgical removal of the only part of the morning that told the truth. The Crown did not have to argue that he intended it. They just had to press play. Marek insisted on giving evidence. Doyle fought him. I know he fought him, because I heard the raised voices through a door in the corridor at lunchtime, and because Doyle came out with a face like a man walking away from a house he has decided not to buy. But Marek could not do otherwise. He had spent 9 years learning one thing, which was that if you can get in front of people and be charming, you will not lose. It was not arrogance in the way people mean the word, it was faith. He had faith in it the way other men have faith in God, and he went up into that witness box on the 11th day the way he had walked out onto 100 stages, with the warm doorway face on. He was funny for about 4 minutes. He got a laugh, an actual laugh, from the public gallery, with a little self-deprecating line about his own stupidity, and I saw his shoulders come down, and I thought, oh no, asterisk, because I had seen that exact adjustment 100 times in edit, and I knew what came next. He had felt the room. He had decided he could play it. And then Owen Pell stood up. Pell was 50 and gray, and had a voice like a man reading a shipping forecast, and he did not raise it once in 3 hours. Mr. Tolliver, you said in your evidence in chief that you never meant any harm. That's right. Let us test the word asterisk meant asterisk. In the van at 11:06 you said, as far as it takes to get a reaction. What reaction were you seeking? A funny one. From whom? A pause. From the audience. Not from Guardsman Rook. No. Then why touch him at all, said Pell. If the reaction you wanted was in the crowd, why lay a hand on a man? A crowd can be made to laugh at a face pulled behind his back. You had already done that. It got a laugh. You told this court a moment ago that it got a laugh. And then you went further. Why? And Marek said, and I do not think he heard himself. I truly do not. I think he simply reached for the answer that had always worked. Because it wasn't asterisk enough. The court did not gasp. Courts don't. What happened was quieter and much worse. 3 journalists in the press row wrote the same 4 words at the same time, and the sound of it, 30 pens on paper, went through that room like a draft under a door. Pell let it sit. He was very, very good. Not enough, he repeated. Mr. Tolliver, on the 14th of 10th month, a man of 76 named Ellis Hone was knocked to the cobblestones in a crush of people who had come to the North Arch to imitate you. He broke his wrist. He is in this courtroom today. He is sitting in the 2nd row of the gallery, and he has been here every day. When you say a joke was not enough, I want you to tell this court what, in your professional opinion, would have been. Marek opened his mouth. And for the first time in the 3 years I had known him, and I think possibly for the first time in his life, Marek Tolliver had nothing to say. Halden Rook was the last witness. He came into that courtroom in his blues, without the bearskin, carrying his cap, and I had never seen his face properly. Do you understand that? 31 million people had looked at that man, and none of us had ever seen asterisk him. He had a broad, plain, weathered face and a small scar on the bridge of his nose that had nothing to do with us. And he was, up close, entirely ordinary, and I sat in the gallery and looked at him and had to put my hand over my mouth. He gave his evidence in about 11 minutes. He was asked what happened, and he said what happened in order with no adjectives. He was asked whether he had been in pain, and he said, "Yes, sir." He was asked how much, and he said, "Enough to notice, sir, not enough to matter." He was asked why he did not report it immediately, and he said, "I did report it, sir. At 12:31 when I came off the post." "You waited an hour." "I finished the duty, sir." "Why?" "Because it wasn't over." And then Perrin Doyle got up, because Doyle had 1 card left and he had to play it, and he played it as gently as it could possibly be played. "Guardsman Rook, you are a soldier of considerable discipline. You could have stepped back. You could have brought your rifle across, called out the guard, and had my client on the cobbles in 3 seconds. Do you accept that?" "Yes, sir." "You are not a helpless man. You chose asterisk to remain still." "Yes, sir." "Then I put it to you," said Doyle, "that no assault upon you was possible that morning because a man who chooses to receive a blow, who is trained to receive it, who could prevent it and elects not to, is not a victim. He is a performer. And what my client interrupted was not a soldier's duty. It was a show. I have thought about what I expected. I think I expected anger, that we would finally at last get the reaction. 3 months late in a wood-paneled room. Halden Rook stood in the box and looked at Perrin Doyle for a moment. Then he turned very slightly and spoke to the judge, because he had been told to address the bench, and he was a man who did what he was told. "My lord, he's asking why I didn't move." "I'll answer it once, and then I'd like to go back to work." And Mr. Justice Hale, who had not permitted a single departure from procedure in 11 days, put down his pen and said, "Go on, guardsman." "The joke needed something from me," Rook said. "Not the punch. The punch was nothing, it's the smallest part of it. The joke needed me. It needed me to become a thing you can laugh at, to shout or swing or flinch or go red or cry or run. That's the whole trade. That's what he came to buy that morning, and it was the only thing on that plinth worth taking, and it was mine, and I didn't give it to him." He turned his cap once in his hands. "They say we're statues, we're not. A statue can't be tempted. I stood there for 61 minutes wanting very badly to put him on the stones, and every one of those minutes was mine, and I paid for them. That's not a show. A show is something you do for people. What I did that morning, I did against myself, because there's an arch behind me and 200 years under my boots, and a man in a chair at Fenner's Cross who did 11 years on that same granite. And if I move for a laugh, then the next man who comes for a laugh gets a little more, and the man after that gets more still, and one day the arch is just a place where you can hit somebody." He looked, then briefly, only once, and without any expression I could name, at the dock. "He thought it was funny that I couldn't do anything," he said. "I could do everything. I did the hardest thing I know how to do. He just couldn't see it, because he was looking for a reaction, and I was the only man in that square who wasn't." Then he said, "That's all, my lord," and stood at ease, and waited, exactly as he had waited on the plinth, for someone to tell him he could go. Nobody told him anything for quite a long time. Owen Pell's closing took 40 minutes, and I remember one paragraph of it, and I will remember it when I have forgotten everything else. "My learned friend has invited you to see this as a joke that went too far. It did not go too far. It arrived exactly where it was sent. The defendant did not lose control of himself for 1 second on the 5th of 9th month. He never lost control at all. He was in perfect command of a plan he had described aloud in a van, and he executed it, and then he sold it, and when the truth of it threatened the sale, he had the truth cut out with a pair of scissors. He believed, my lord, that nothing would happen. That is the belief this case is really about. He believed that because a man in a red tunic is required to be still, the world around that man is required to be still also. That discipline is a kind of absence, that silence is a kind of permission, and that a thing which does not hit you back cannot hit you back. Justice is slow. That is not the same as blind, and it is not the same as asleep. It is slow because it is listening, and it has been listening to this defendant for 4 months, in his own voice, on his own recordings, in his own words. He thought the joke was that no one could answer him. The answer took 4 months, it is here now, and it is not laughing. The jury was out for 5 hours and 40 minutes. Guilty of aggravated assault upon a sworn guardsman on ceremonial duty. Guilty of profiting from an unlawful act. Guilty of criminal trespass within a royal precinct. Marek Tolliver stood to hear it because you stand, and I watched the back of his head from the gallery. And when the foreman said the first asterisk guilty, I saw his shoulders go up, very slightly, the way a man's do when cold water hits him, and I realized that he had not, at any point in any part of himself, believed that this could happen to him. He turned around. He looked up into the gallery, and he found me, of course he found me. He always knew where the camera was, and his face was doing something I had never seen on it and have never seen since. He was waiting for the laugh. He stood in the dock of the Crown Court of Eldermore with 3 convictions on him, and he looked up at 200 people, and he waited with genuine, terrible patience for somebody to break and start laughing. Because that had always happened, that had asterisk always happened. That was the whole of the world as he understood it. Nobody did. And I watched the last thing go out of Marek Tolliver's face, and I understood that the silence he had ordered me to cut out of the video had been waiting for him this entire time, and had simply, at last, caught up. He was sentenced on the 20th of 12th month. Princess Adela came. She sat in the third row of the gallery in a plain dark coat with no entourage worth the name, and she stood when the court stood and sat when it sat, and she did not speak to a single journalist on the way in or the way out. She was there in her capacity as colonel-in-chief of the regiment, and what that meant, in the arithmetic of Eldermore, was that the Crown had decided to be seen watching. Mr. Justice Hale spoke for 22 minutes. He gave Marek his credit where credit was due, his age, his lack of previous convictions, the fact that he had, after the verdict, finally and belatedly stopped talking. And then he took it all back again with an exactness that I have never forgotten. You have said repeatedly and publicly that you are being punished for a joke. You are not. You are being punished because you understood, better than most men alive, exactly how a laugh is manufactured, and you used that understanding to sell a nation the sound of itself laughing at a soldier who could not answer you. 200 people in that forecourt stopped laughing within 6 seconds. The realm laughed for 3 weeks because you and Mr. Wren took the 6 seconds out. The gravest thing you did was not to strike Guardsman Rook. It was to teach 141 other people how to. You will go to prison for 2 years and 8 months. The proceeds order came after, 1,410,000 crowns, every crown that the 3 videos and their advertising had ever earned forfeited in full, half to the regimental benevolent fund, the remainder to a compensation fund for those injured at the North Arch, of which the first claimant was a 76-year-old man with a walking stick and a regimental tie, who did not want it, and who was told by a judge, quite firmly, that he was having it. And there was one more order, and it was 2 lines long, and it is the one they printed. Marek Tolliver was excluded for life from every ceremonial precinct in the realm. He may not stand within 30 meters of the North Arch or of any post held by the King's Own, not on a state occasion, not on a Saturday, not ever. He will never again be allowed to look at the thing he thought was funny. I was sentenced 8 days later in the same court, in front of the same judge. I pleaded guilty to perverting the course of justice and to a charge of aiding the offense, and I did not ask for anything, and my advocate, a young woman who had been assigned to me and was better than I deserved, argued only that I had brought the evidence in when I could have burned it, and that I had brought it knowing exactly what it would cost. I got 18 months, suspended for 2 years, and 400 hours of unpaid work, and a criminal record that will follow me into every room I ever walk into for the rest of my life. I did the 400 hours at a day center in Fenner's Cross, 4 streets from a care home with a window, and I am not going to pretend that this was justice, because it wasn't. Marek threw the punch. I made it funny. Only one of us went to prison, and it was not the one who took the silence out. The judge said one thing to me before I left the dock. He said, "Mr. Wren, you are the only person in this case who did something difficult without being made to. Do not spend the rest of your life congratulating yourself for it." I have tried to obey him. Some days I manage it. Bexley Crane gave evidence for the Crown and was not charged. She lives in the western provinces now and works with horses and has not made a video in 2 years, and we do not speak, and I think that is right. The last thing she ever said to me was in a corridor outside Court 4, and it was, "I laughed, Ivo. He didn't make me." I just did. The channel was taken down in the second week of the trial, not by a court, by the platform, quietly, on a Tuesday. 2.1 million subscribers went wherever those people go. The sponsors were gone by the following morning, which is exactly what Perrin Doyle had said would happen, on a day when Marek Tolliver laughed at him. You cannot watch the video anymore. Not the real one. There are copies, of course there are copies. The world does not delete, but the master is in an evidence archive with a case number on it, and every copy in circulation is the version I made, and the version I made has a laugh track on it that a court of law has formally declared to be a fabrication. There is no version of it left in the world with honest laughter on it. There never was. That was the point. The review of Guardsman Halden Rook's conduct closed in the first week of the new year. It closed with a commendation. The finding, in the language of the regiment, was that on the 5th of 9th month Guardsman Rook had maintained the standing of the post under a provocation designed and executed for the express purpose of destroying it, and that his conduct was, and I quote, the doctrine correctly performed. Sergeant Major Caddock Blaine read it out on the inner court in front of the 3rd Company. Rook, I am told, stood at attention throughout and said, "Sir," once at the end, and then asked whether he was still on the noon duty and was told that he was and went and did it. King Alaric received him at the palace in 2nd month. It was not a public occasion. There were 11 people in the room. Rook wore his blues. His wife Nessa wore a coat she had bought that week and never wore again, and in a wheelchair by the window in a good suit that no longer fitted him was Corbin Rook, who was 81 and who had done 11 years on the granite under the North Arch and who could not, most days, reliably recall his son's name. The king spoke to Halden for some time. Then he crossed the room and crouched down, actually crouched, on one knee in front of a chair, so that an old man would not have to lift his head, and said, "Mr. Rook, I'm told you know the ground under my arch better than my architects do." And Corbin Rook, who did not know the year and did not know the king, looked up with perfect clarity and said, 22 paces from the plinth to the Queen's steps, sir. 22 out, 22 back. It's 23 if it's been raining because you shorten up." And King Alaric said, "Then I have been walking it wrong for 40 years, and stayed there on one knee, holding an old guardsman's hand, for a good deal longer than protocol required." Halden Rook did not cry. Nessa told me he did not cry then and did not cry afterward, and that when they got home, he sat down on the edge of the bed with his boots still on and stayed like that for about an hour, and then got up and polished them. The barriers came down on the 4th of 3rd month. They reopened the forecourt on a Saturday deliberately, because a Saturday was when it had been taken away. There was no ceremony. That was the choice they made, and it was the right one. No speeches, no ribbon, nothing to film. At 8 in the morning, 2 constables and 4 workmen simply took the barriers away and loaded them onto a lorry and drove off, and the flower sellers came back to the Kingsway side, and the man with the nut cart set up in his old place and put his prices up. And the city came. Not for a spectacle. It came the way it always had, ants and schools and prams and men proposing badly, and 3 generations of a family standing shoulder to shoulder at 11 in the morning, to watch 100 men in red do something extremely difficult extremely well, for no reason except that it is theirs. I went. I stood well back at the edge, near the transit hall, with my hands in the pockets of a gray coat with a torn lining, and I did not take out a phone, and I have not taken out a phone in a public place since the 5th of 9th month, and I do not intend to again. I watched the change of guard, and about 20 minutes in, a young man near the railing started up a bit. I knew it the instant it began, because I knew the shape of it in my bones, the friend already filming, the shoulders squaring, the little pantomime lean toward the plinth, the reaching for a laugh. He got about 4 words out. And a woman in front of him, 60, in a green coat, with a shopping bag, turned round and said, quite loudly, without any anger at all, "No, not here, we don't do that anymore." And the people around her did not laugh. They did not shout him down or film him or make a thing of it. They just stopped and turned and looked at him, 40 or 50 ordinary citizens of Harrogate on a Saturday morning, and waited. And the young man put his phone in his pocket, and his ears went red, and he stayed and watched the rest of the change of guard like everybody else, and afterward he clapped. That is the whole of it. That is what justice looked like in the end, not the sentence, not the forfeiture, not even the exclusion order. It looked like a woman in a green coat with a shopping bag, saying no asterisk on behalf of a man who is not permitted to say it himself. On the plinth under the North Arch that morning, standing his 2 hours, was Guardsman Halden Rook. I knew it would be him. I had checked. That is the only piece of the old craft I have kept, the knowing where to stand, the knowing when, and I used it once, that one time, and then I put it away. I did not go up to him. There is no version of that conversation that is for him rather than for me, and I have made enough things that were for me. So I stood at the back of the forecourt with the crowd between us, and I looked at the man for a while. Red wool, brass buttons, white gloves, black fur, the rifle at his side, eyes forward, half his face in shadow under the peak, entirely at rest in the middle of 2,000 people, costing us nothing and giving us nothing, and holding up an arch that has been standing for 200 years on nothing but the willingness of men like him to be still. Then I went home. The clip is 9 seconds long, and I am the reason it exists. But I have heard the real one, the unsweetened one, the one from inside my own coat pocket, the one with the honest microphone that was too honest for what we did, and there is no laughter on it anywhere. There is a small dull sound like a book dropped on a carpet, and there is a pigeon, and a nut cart, and 6 seconds of a whole square finding out, one rank at a time, what it had come to see. That is what my friend could never understand, right up until the moment a foreman said guilty, and he turned round looking for a laugh that wasn't there. He thought the joke was that a man couldn't hit back. The joke was that a man didn't have to.